I flew more than 2,000 miles just to hear my father say that I was not invited. That was the first sentence I remember while standing in front of the door of the house where I grew up. My name is Lena Carter. I am 32. I live in Seattle and work for a small data analytics company. For the past 5 years, I have hardly been back to the town of Pine Creek, Montana, the place where my parents have lived their whole lives, not because I did not want to return, but because there, I had never truly belonged. The rental car stopped in front of the familiar wooden house at nearly 7 in the evening. The lights inside were bright, cars were parked along both sides of the road, music and laughter spilled out onto the porch. About 60 people were inside. They had come to attend the 45th wedding anniversary party of my parents. I stood still for a few seconds in front of the door, holding a gift box wrapped in silver paper. The box was not large, but heavy enough to make my hand ache after the long flight. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The door had barely opened. The air in the living room changed immediately. A few people turned first, then a few more, then almost the entire room. The music was still playing, but the conversations slowly faded away. I recognized many familiar faces. Mr. Miller, the grocery store owner, the Brooks family, old neighbors, my high school math teacher. They looked at me as if they were seeing someone who had wandered into the wrong party. In the middle of the room, my sister Diana was standing beside the drinks table. She wore a red dress and held a glass of champagne, looking exactly like the host of the party. Diana's eyes stopped on me for 2 seconds. Then she turned and said something to my mother. My mother looked up, her face immediately hardened. The room fell so quiet that I could hear the ice in someone's glass tapping against the side of the crystal. I took a few more steps into the living room. "Hello, Mom," I said as normally as I could. My mother did not answer immediately. She looked around the room, then back at me, as if she needed to say something in front of everyone. Finally, she spoke, her voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "We did not invite you." A few people shifted slightly. No one said anything. I stood still. Before I could respond, my father walked out from the dining area. He looked me up and down, his eyes stopping on the gift box in my hands. "Diana organized this party," my mother added coldly. "The guest list was made by her." Someone in the corner coughed softly. The air grew heavier. I looked at Diana. She said nothing. She simply took a sip of wine and avoided my eyes. My father stepped closer. He pointed at the box in my hands. "We do not need gifts from the daughter who abandoned the family." Then he reached out his hand. Not to take the box. He shoved it hard out of my hands. The box hit the wooden floor with a dull thud. The silver paper crumpled at one corner. The entire room froze. No one laughed. No one spoke. 60 people stood there, looking down at the box on the floor. I bent down and picked it up. One corner of the wrapping had torn slightly, but I did not try to fix it. I just held it in my hands, feeling its familiar weight. I lifted my head and looked at each face in the room. Some people avoided my eyes. Some looked at me with curiosity. Some were clearly waiting to see what would happen next. I spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I spent 5 years preparing this gift." No one replied. Diana placed her wine glass down on the table. My father crossed his arms. My mother turned her face away. I waited a few seconds. Only the soft music and the low hum of the air conditioning filled the room. That was enough. I nodded slightly, as if I had just understood something I should have understood a long time ago. "I hope the two of you have a wonderful evening," I said. Then I turned and walked out the door. No one called my name. No one tried to stop me. I walked down the steps and went straight to the rental car parked in front of the house. The door closed behind me. The music and voices inside the house slowly returned, but they faded as I walked toward the street. I placed the gift box on the passenger seat, sat behind the wheel, and looked at the house for a few seconds. That house. The house that during the past 5 years I had done everything to keep from being taken by the bank. I started the car and drove away without looking back. But inside that house, only a few minutes after I left, someone would open that gift box. And when the 60 people in the living room saw what was inside, the entire town of Pine Creek would learn a secret my family had been living with for the past 5 years. The real story started 5 years earlier, before that 2,000-mile flight. Before the gift box fell onto the floor in front of 60 people, I had a childhood that, from the outside, looked completely normal. My home was in the small town of Pine Creek, Montana. One main road, one high school, one grocery store, one old bar, and a church right in the center of town. In places like that, everyone knows everyone, and everyone knows the Carter family. My father, Robert Carter, was the best mechanic in town. He repaired cars in the garage behind our house for more than 30 years. Anyone with a broken car came to him. My mother, Linda, worked part-time at the town library. We were not rich, but we had a large wooden house, a wide backyard, and a life stable enough that we did not worry much. And we had 2 daughters, Diana and me. Diana was 3 years older than I was. If Pine Creek was a small stage, Diana was born to stand in the center of it. She was outgoing, able to talk easily with anyone, always laughing loudly, and always knowing how to make the whole room pay attention to her. In high school, Diana was the cheerleading captain, the student council president, and a familiar face at every town event. Whenever there was a summer festival, Diana was usually the one standing on stage hosting the program. My father always sat in the front row, lifting his chin proudly whenever someone mentioned her name. "I told you so," he often said to his friends. "The girl has leadership qualities." People nodded in agreement. Diana loved the spotlight, and the spotlight loved Diana. As for me, I always stood behind. I did not hate that. I was simply used to it. I studied well. I read a lot of books. The town library was almost the second place I lived during my high school years. I did not participate in many activities. Not because I could not. I just never felt that I needed to be noticed. But inside the family, that difference was always mentioned in ways that made me understand my place clearly. Summer BBQ gatherings made that especially obvious. My parents often invited friends to the backyard. People brought beer, grilled meat, folding chairs, and talked until night. Kids ran around the yard. Adults stood around the grill. Once, when I was about 16, one of my father's friends asked him how his daughters were doing. My father pointed at Diana first. "That is Diana," he said. "She has talent." Diana at that moment was telling a story to her group of friends and everyone was laughing loudly. Then the man looked at me. I was sitting at the wooden table reading a book. "And the other girl?" he asked. My father shrugged. "Oh, that is Lena." He smiled lightly and added, "Diana has talent. Lena is just Lena." The sentence made everyone laugh. Not a cruel laugh. Just the polite laughter people give during a party. I laughed too. I lifted my head from the book and smiled as if I also thought it was funny. But in my mind at that moment one thought was very clear. I knew exactly what he meant. Diana was the child worth being proud of. And I was simply the other one. For many years I thought that was normal. Every family has one child who stands out more. Right. I did not compete. I did not complain. I simply did my part well. I graduated high school with the highest grades in my class. On graduation day, my mother attended. My father could not come because the garage that day had too many cars needing repair. Diana was studying in another city at the time, so she did not come either. After the ceremony, I stood outside the school for a while, holding my diploma in my hands. Many other families were taking photos with their children. Laughter filled the yard. My mother patted my shoulder lightly. "You did well," she said. Then she looked at her watch. "We should go home. I still need to prepare dinner." We got in the car. No photographs, no celebration, no one saying they were proud of me. But at that time, I still believed that maybe things would change when I got older. Maybe when I left Pine Creek, went to college, and started my own life, things would be different. I did not know that the day I left that house would also be the day my father said a sentence I would remember for many years afterward. I left Pine Creek on a September morning. The sky was clear, the wind light, the kind of weather people call a perfect day to start something new. My old car was parked in front of the house, the trunk filled with 2 suitcases, a box of books, and a few random things. Not much, but enough to begin a new life in Seattle. After graduating from college, I received a job at a small data analytics company. It was not a big position, and the salary was not high, But for me at that time, it felt like a door opening away from Pine Creek. I had waited for that door for many years. My mother stood on the porch with her arms folded, watching me close the trunk. "Seattle is very far," she said. "You will get used to it slowly." I nodded. The truth was, I was not afraid of the distance. What worried me more was not knowing whether anyone would remember me. Inside the kitchen, Diana was sitting at the table drinking coffee. She had come home a few days earlier, mostly to visit friends in town. "I think you will like Seattle," Diana said when I walked in to grab a bottle of water. "There must be many libraries there." Her voice sounded gentle, not sarcastic. Diana had never truly been cruel to me. She was simply used to people revolving around her, and I was used to standing at the edge. "I will be fine," I said. We hugged quickly. No tears, no promises to call every day. Just a quiet hug between two sisters who had grown used to living in different directions. When I stepped into the garage, my father was bent over the open hood of a pickup truck. The sound of metal and tools clinking echoed in the space. I stood there for a few seconds. "Dad," I called. He did not look up immediately. "Yeah, I am leaving now." My father kept looking into the engine, tightening a bolt. After a few seconds, he spoke. "Seattle." "Yes." He nodded slightly, but did not look at me. I waited a little longer. I was not even sure what I was waiting for. Maybe a good luck, or at least to drive safely. But my father simply wiped his hands on an oily rag. Then he said a sentence I would remember very clearly years later. "At least the house will have one less mouth to feed." He said it as if it were just a casual joke. He even chuckled softly. I laughed too. A quick smile, almost like a reflex. "Yeah," I said. Then I turned and walked out of the garage. That was the last moment I stood inside that house as someone who lived there. I drove away from Pine Creek around 10 in the morning. The highway stretched across dry fields and distant mountains. In the rearview mirror, the town slowly became smaller until it disappeared completely. I turned on the radio. An old song played, but I did not really hear it. In my mind, my father's sentence kept repeating. "At least the house will have one less mouth to feed." At that moment, I told myself not to think too much about it. My father had always spoken bluntly like that. He was not the kind of person who knew how to express affection easily. Maybe he was just joking. At least that was what I wanted to believe. The first months in Seattle were busy. A new job, a small apartment, a city bigger than anywhere I had ever lived before. But I still tried to keep one habit. Every week, I called home. The first time, my mother answered. We talked for about 10 minutes. She asked about my work and whether I was getting used to the city. The next week, I called again. My mother answered again, but the conversation was shorter. The third week, Diana answered. "I am visiting home for a few days," she said. Mom and Dad went out. We talked for a few minutes. Then the call ended. The following weeks, I kept calling. Sometimes my mother answered. Sometimes no one did. "Just checking on everyone. I am doing fine. I will call again next week." Gradually, no one called back anymore. My life in Seattle continued. My job became more stable. I made new friends. The city slowly began to feel like a real home instead of just a temporary place. But every time I saw my family's old phone number in my contacts, I still felt a small, empty space somewhere inside me. I did not know that a few years later, a phone call from Aunt Carol would reveal that during the entire time I believed my family was fine, the house in Pine Creek had been standing on the edge of foreclosure. The call came on a Monday evening. It was raining in Seattle. I had just returned to my small apartment after work. The clock on the kitchen stove showed almost 9. I placed my bag on the chair and planned to heat the leftover noodles from the night before. My phone vibrated on the table. An unknown number. I almost let it ring until it stopped, but just before the call ended, I answered. "Hello." On the other end, a familiar woman's voice spoke. "Lena." I froze. "Aunt Carol." "Yes, it is me." Aunt Carol is my mother's younger sister. She lives in a town near Pine Creek, about 40 minutes away by car. We do not talk often. In fact, almost never. "What is going on, Aunt Carol?" I asked. On the other end, she stayed silent for a few seconds. "Tonight I am calling because I think you should know something." Her voice sounded more tense than usual. I sat down slowly in the chair. What is it? Aunt Carol lowered her voice slightly as if someone might be listening. Your parents are having trouble with the house. I frowned. What kind of trouble? Mortgage. She said it directly. For 3 months they have not paid the bank. I straightened in my seat. 3 months. Yes, Aunt Carol sighed. The bank has already sent warning letters. If this continues, they may begin foreclosure procedures. I looked out the window. Rain was still falling across the dark Seattle streets. The house in Pine Creek appeared clearly in my mind. The backyard, my father's garage, the big maple tree in front of the porch. What did Mom and Dad say about it? I asked. Aunt Carol stayed quiet for a moment. Diana says she is handling it. Handling it how? She says she will pay the mortgage. Hearing that, I exhaled quietly. Then it should be fine. But on the other end, Aunt Carol did not answer immediately. The silence stretched for a moment. Aunt Carol, I said. Lena, I do not think she is paying it. My chest tightened slightly. Why do you think that? Because I spoke with the bank last week. I was surprised. Why were you speaking with the bank? Your father asked me to help read some documents. He did not understand everything. Her voice grew softer. Lena, there has been no payment in 3 months. I looked down at the table. 3 months. If the mortgage was not paid, the bank would send warnings. After that, they could start foreclosure. Why would Diana say she was paying it? I asked. I do not know, Aunt Carol said. Maybe she believed she could find the money later. What about Mom and Dad? They believe her. That answer did not surprise me. Diana had always been the one they trusted. If another 1 or 2 months pass without money, they may begin foreclosure procedures. A cold feeling moved slowly down my spine. I imagined the house with a sign in the yard. Foreclosure. Bank repossessed. My father closing the garage. My mother leaving the home where they had lived for more than 30 years. How much is the monthly mortgage? I asked. About $2,400. The number hung quietly in the air. It was not a small amount, especially for me at that time. I had only been working a few years and my savings were not large. But I still asked, Are you sure no one is paying? Yes, not even Diana. No. My apartment felt silent, only the sound of rain outside. I am not calling to make you do anything, Aunt Carol said. I only thought you should know. I understood. She was simply telling me the truth. The decision was mine. Do Mom and Dad know the situation is that serious? I asked. Not completely. Why? Because Diana always says she will handle it. I closed my eyes. A very clear image appeared in my mind. A summer barbecue. My father raising a beer in front of his friends. Diana has talent. The memory echoed quietly in my mind. I stood up and walked to the window. The streets of Seattle reflected the city lights on the wet pavement. I lived more than 2,000 miles away from Pine Creek. I had left that town years ago. But that house was still the only place that had ever truly been called home. Aunt Carol, I said. Yes. If the payments start again this month, will the bank accept it? Maybe, she said. As long as the payments begin again. I opened my laptop and searched for the bank email Aunt Carol had sent me earlier. The numbers appeared on the screen. Mortgage. $2,400 per month. If I paid it, my life would have to change in many ways. No more vacations, no more comfortable shopping, maybe more overtime work, maybe giving up many plans. But if I did nothing, that house might disappear. I sat in front of the screen for almost an hour. Finally, I opened the bank payment page. I filled in the information. The amount. The account. I looked at the confirm payment button. One thought crossed my mind. Maybe I should call home first. But I already knew what would happen. My parents would say Diana was handling everything. Diana would say everything was fine, and life would continue the same way until it was too late. I pressed the button. The first payment was sent. $2,400. When the screen showed payment successful, I leaned back slowly in my chair. The room was silent. No one knew what I had just done. Not my parents. Not Diana. No one in Pine Creek. I whispered quietly into the empty apartment. Just until things become stable again. I did not know at that moment that the decision I made on that rainy Seattle night would last for 5 years. The first payment was $2,400. The second was the same. Then the third. At first I believed I would only help for a short time. Maybe a few months. Maybe a year. Just until Diana truly managed to find the money or my parents found another solution. But month after month nothing changed. No money came from Pine Creek. No phone call saying everything was fine again. Only the confirmation email from the bank appearing in my inbox on the first day of every month. After 6 months, I understood something clearly. If I stopped the payments, that house would begin sliding down a hill that no one could stop. So I continued. My life in Seattle slowly began to change around those numbers. I moved from a 2-bedroom apartment into a smaller studio. My dining table became my work desk. The old sofa was something I bought secondhand from a neighbor who was moving away. I started bringing lunch from home to work instead of eating outside. When my coworkers invited me on vacations, I politely refused. I already have plans, I would say. No one asked further. At night, I began taking freelance data analysis projects. The work was not difficult, but it took hours. Some nights I worked until nearly midnight, and every first day of the month I opened the bank page and looked at the same number before pressing confirm. $2,400. Again. And again. And again. 1 year. 2 years. 3 years. Sometimes I thought about calling home and telling the truth. But each time I imagined the conversation, it stopped me. My father would stay silent. My mother would say I did not need to do that. Diana would probably say I was exaggerating. And in the end, everyone would feel indebted. I did not want that. I only wanted the house to still exist. So I stayed silent. The only person who knew was Ethan. I met Ethan during my 2nd year in Seattle. We worked in the same office building but for different companies. He was a software engineer, tall, quiet, the type of person who listened more than he spoke. We became friends naturally. First coffee after work, then long evening walks around Lake Union. About a year later, Ethan noticed something. One evening, he glanced at the budget spreadsheet on my laptop. "Lena," he said, "why do you transfer such a large amount of money every month?" I was about to say it was savings, but Ethan looked at me long enough that I realized I did not need to lie, so I told him everything. Aunt Carol's phone call, the mortgage, the monthly payments. Ethan listened without interrupting, without judging. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and stayed quiet for a moment. "Does your family know?" he asked. "No." "What about Diana? Everyone thinks she is paying it." Ethan watched me silently for a few seconds. "Why don't you tell them the truth?" I shrugged. "Why should I?" He did not answer immediately. After a while, he spoke slowly. "Lena, you are carrying an entire house." I smiled a little. "It is only the mortgage." Ethan shook his head. "No, it is not only money." He pointed toward the laptop screen where rows of identical payments filled the page. "How long have you been doing this?" "More than 2 years." Ethan breathed out slowly. I expected him to tell me I should stop, or that I was letting people take advantage of me, but he did not say that. Instead, he asked only one question. "Do you want to continue?" I thought for a few seconds. Then I nodded. "At least until the mortgage is fully paid." Ethan stayed quiet for a moment longer. Then he said something I still remember clearly. "If you are holding the roof over your family's head," he paused for a second, then continued, "then I will help you hold the roof over ours." I looked at him surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. Then he smiled. "But I want to." From that moment, the burden felt a little lighter. Not because the money became smaller, but because I was no longer carrying the secret alone. Meanwhile, in Pine Creek, the story was completely different. Whenever there were family gatherings, Diana often spoke proudly about how she was handling the mortgage. Aunt Carol told me about it later. One evening during a family dinner, my father raised his glass of wine in front of several relatives. "Diana is the only child who truly cares about the family," he said proudly. Everyone nodded. Someone asked, "Is she helping pay the mortgage?" My father smiled proudly. "Yes, she has been doing it for quite some time." Diana simply smiled modestly and said nothing. No one asked further. No one checked the bank records. And no one knew that every month, more than 2,000 miles away, $2,400 quietly left my account. Aunt Carol was the only one who knew the truth. Once she called me and asked, "Are you really never going to tell them?" "No," I answered. "Why?" I thought for a moment before replying. "Because if they believe Diana is the one holding the roof over that house, then at least Mom and Dad can still feel proud of one child." On the other end of the phone, Aunt Carol stayed silent for a long time. The 5th year passed faster than I expected. One early autumn morning, I opened an email from the bank. There was a sentence I had waited years to see. "Mortgage, paid in full." I read the message twice just to be sure. No more payments. No more $2,400 every month. No more endless numbers in the transaction history. After 5 years, the total amount I had sent was more than $140,000. I closed my laptop and sat quietly in the small kitchen of my Seattle apartment. Ethan walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. "What happened?" he asked. I turned the laptop toward him. He read the line on the screen. Then he looked up at me. "It's done." I nodded slowly. A strange feeling moved through me. Relief, but also emptiness. 5 years of effort. And suddenly, it was finished. 2 weeks later, I was scrolling through my phone during lunch break when I saw a Facebook post. It was from Diana. The photo showed our house in Pine Creek decorated with lights and flowers. Under the photo, she wrote, "Celebrating Mom and Dad's 45-year anniversary. Can't wait to see everyone this weekend." The guest list was practically the entire town. There was only one thing missing: my name. I stared at the post for a long time. Strings of lights hung across the porch. New flower pots sat beside the front door. Long tables were set up across the lawn, clearly prepared for a large celebration. The comments continued endlessly. "Congratulations. We will be there. Looking forward to it." Names from nearly the entire town appeared in the thread. Old classmates, former neighbors, people I remembered clearly from those summer barbecues years ago. I scrolled down, then back up again just to be sure I had not missed anything. My name was not there. No message. No invitation. 2 weeks earlier, I had received confirmation that the mortgage was fully paid. And now, my family was hosting a celebration for my parents. The entire town was invited. Except me. I placed my phone on the desk. Part of me wanted to ignore it, close the app, continue working, pretend I had never seen the post. But another part of me could not do that. I picked up the phone again and tapped Diana's name. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. "Lena." Her voice sounded slightly surprised. "Busy preparing for the party?" I asked. "Yeah, there is a lot to do," she replied. "I saw the Facebook post." "Oh, right," she said casually. I waited for her to say something more, but she didn't. "Did you forget to invite me?" I asked. I heard the sound of a chair moving and distant voices as if she had stepped outside the room. "Not exactly," she said finally. "Then what?" I asked. Diana sighed quietly. "Lena, Dad doesn't want you there." The sentence came out simply. No hesitation, no emotion, just a statement. I stayed silent for several seconds. "Dad said that." "Yes." "Did he explain why?" "He just thinks things will be easier if you're not there." I stared out the office window. The sky above Seattle was unusually clear that afternoon. Glass buildings reflected the sunlight across the city, easier for who I asked quietly. Diana didn't answer immediately. "Lena, don't make this more complicated." "It is already simple," I replied. "Our family is throwing a big party, and you just told me I'm not invited." Diana sighed again. "You left Pine Creek a long time ago. So that means I'm not family anymore." "Don't twist it like that," she said. "Then explain it to me." Silence filled the phone line again. "Finally," she said, "Dad just thinks that after all these years, it's better if you continue living your life in Seattle." I nodded slowly, even though she couldn't see me. "I understand, Lena," she began. "It's okay," I interrupted. "I hope the party goes well." Then I ended the call. The phone lay quietly on the desk. I didn't feel the anger I expected, only a strange calm. That evening, I returned home late. Ethan was sitting at the kitchen table working on his laptop. He looked up when I walked in. "Long day?" "Not really." I hung my coat over the chair and sat across from him. Ethan studied my face for a few seconds. "Something happened," he said. I slid my phone across the table. Ethan read it slowly. Then he looked up. You weren't invited. I nodded. My sister said Dad doesn't want me there. After everything you've done, Ethan said quietly. You know why I replied. No one there knows. Ethan said nothing. I stood up and walked into the bedroom closet. Inside was a large gray storage box. I pulled it out and carried it back to the kitchen. Inside were neatly stacked documents tied together with string. Bank statements, transfer receipts, confirmation emails, one stack for every month, 5 years of records. I placed the box on the table. Ethan looked down immediately, understanding what it was. Everything he asked, everything I replied. He picked up one stack and glanced at the top page. Mortgage payment $2,400. Again and again. I leaned against the table, staring at the papers. Then I said something I hadn't planned to say. What do you think if I bring the truth to that party? Ethan looked at me silently. He did not answer immediately. He studied my face carefully. Are you sure? He asked finally. Why not? Do you think it is the same now? Ethan did not argue. He placed the papers back into the box. Then he asked one final question. Are you ready? I looked at the gray box. 5 years of my life inside it, $2,400 every month, more than $140,000. I closed the lid slowly. I've waited 5 years, I said quietly. That Saturday night, the house in Pine Creek glowed with light. Strings of warm yellow lights hung along the porch roof. Long tables covered in white cloth filled the backyard. In the living room, about 60 people stood in small groups, laughing and talking. Soft music played from a speaker in the corner. For many people in town, this was not just a party, it was an event. 45 years of marriage for Robert and Linda Carter. In the center of the living room, Diana stood beside the drink table holding a glass of champagne. She wore a striking red dress and her hair was styled perfectly. Every eye in the room was on her. My parents stood beside her, watching proudly. Diana raised her glass. Thank you all for coming tonight, she said loudly. The conversations in the room slowly faded. My family has lived in Pine Creek for nearly 30 years. Many of you here are practically family to us. Several people nodded. A few soft laughs spread across the room. Diana continued speaking. The past few years haven't always been easy. She paused and glanced toward my parents. There were times when I thought we might lose this house. Some people exchanged quiet looks. The story was not entirely new to everyone. But family is family, Diana continued. When difficulties come, we face them together. My father nodded slowly beside her. Diana raised her glass a little higher. So tonight I just want to say that if I have done one thing right for my family, she took a breath, then continued. It was choosing to pay the mortgage for this house for the past 5 years. For a brief moment the room was silent. Then applause exploded around the room. Someone whistled. Someone shouted, "That's incredible!" My father stepped forward and placed a proud hand on Diana's shoulder. I always said it, he declared loudly. Diana is the child who truly cares about this family. Applause filled the room again. Diana smiled modestly and lowered her head slightly, and at that exact moment the front door opened. A gust of cold air moved through the room. People near the entrance turned first. Then others followed. The applause slowly faded. I stood in the doorway holding a silver-wrapped gift box. The entire room fell silent. Nearly 60 people stared in my direction. I recognized many of them immediately. Mr. Miller, the Brooks family, my old math teacher, people who had spent years visiting our backyard. Diana reacted first. The champagne glass in her hand froze halfway to her lips. My father turned slowly. His eyes stopped on me. My mother stood beside him, stiff and silent. I stepped into the living room. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my feet. No one spoke. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "We didn't invite you," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. The air grew heavy again. People shifted uncomfortably. I looked at my mother calmly. "I know, but I thought I should still come." Diana set her glass down quickly. "Lena, this is not the time." My father stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the box in my hands. "This party was organized by Diana," he said. "The guest list was her decision." I nodded slightly. "I know." My father glanced again at the box. We don't need gifts from a daughter who abandoned the family. Then he reached out and shoved the box from my hands. It struck the wooden floor with a dull thud. The silver paper dented at the corner. No one laughed. No one spoke. 60 people stood silently staring down at the box. I bent down and picked it up. The wrapping had torn slightly, but I didn't fix it. I simply held the box in my hands and lifted my head. I looked slowly across the room, face after face. Some people avoided my eyes. Some watched with curiosity. Some waited quietly for what would happen next. I spoke clearly. I spent 5 years preparing this gift. No one responded. My father crossed his arms. Diana stood frozen. My mother turned away. I waited a moment. Only the soft music and the low hum of the air conditioning filled the room. That was enough. I nodded gently. Anyway, I hope you both enjoy the evening. Then I turned and walked toward the door. No one called my name. No one stopped me. I walked out of that house for the second time in my life. The door closed behind me. The music inside slowly returned. But only a few minutes later, someone would pick up the gift box I had dropped. And when it was opened, the 60 people in that house would see a truth none of them had ever known. A truth written with 5 years of my life. Inside the house, the party continued, but the atmosphere had changed. People stood quietly around the room. Some looked toward the door where I had left. Others stared at the floor. The silver-wrapped box still rested on the ground. Finally, Aunt Carol stepped forward and picked it up. "Robert," she said, "at least we should see what she brought." My father shrugged dismissively. Probably something she grabbed at the airport. A few uncomfortable laughs appeared. Aunt Carol placed the box on the table and slowly removed the silver wrapping. Inside was not a gift, no wine, no photo frame, only a thick stack of documents. Aunt Carol frowned and lifted the first bundle. People nearby leaned closer curiously. "What is that?" someone asked. Aunt Carol studied the first page, then the second, then the third. Her expression changed. "Carol," my mother asked nervously, "what is it?" Aunt Carol lifted her head slowly. Her eyes moved from my father to Diana. Then she spoke clearly. "These are mortgage payment confirmations." Murmurs spread through the room. "Mortgage," someone repeated. Aunt Carol held up a page. "Pine Creek Bank payment, $2,400. She turned to the next page. "Next month also $2,400. She turned another page. And another. The same number again and again. People exchanged confused looks. Diana stood motionless. My father frowned. "So what he said?" "Diana told us she was paying the mortgage." Aunt Carol looked at him quietly. Then she read the name printed on the page. "Paid by Lena Carter." The room fell silent. Not the same silence as before. This one was heavier. Aunt Carol pulled more papers from the box. Not just one or two, but dozens. Each page showing the same information. Date, amount, and the name Lena Carter. Someone whispered, "How many payments are there?" Aunt Carol answered slowly. 60. Several people gasped. My father stepped forward and grabbed a paper, then another. His eyes scanned the lines again and again. Lena Carter. Month after month. Year after year. The pages trembled slightly in his hands. "What is this?" he asked quietly. No one answered. Aunt Carol reached into the box again and pulled out the final sheet. "There is a letter," she said softly, handwritten. The room remained completely silent. "Read it," someone whispered. Aunt Carol unfolded the page and began reading. "If you are reading these documents, then I have probably already left the party." Several people glanced toward the door. "I did not bring these papers to embarrass anyone. I only thought that after 5 years everyone should know the truth." Aunt Carol paused, then continued. 5 years ago, when I learned this house might be taken by the bank, I decided to help. $2,400 every month. For 5 years. No one knew. The room was completely still. Only the sound of paper moving in Aunt Carol's hands. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't want anyone to feel indebted. And if everyone believed Diana was the one doing it, then at least Mom and Dad could still feel proud of one of their children. Aunt Carol's voice slowed as she reached the final line. "I don't need thanks. I only hope this house will always remain home for my parents." Aunt Carol lowered the letter. No one spoke. My father stared at the pages in his hands. Lena's name repeating again and again. Finally, he turned slowly toward Diana. You said you paid the mortgage. His voice had become quiet. Diana opened her mouth, but no words came out. Every person in the room watched her. She looked around the room. 60 faces, 60 pairs of eyes. There was nowhere to hide. Slowly, Diana shook her head. Then she stepped backward. One step, then another. She turned and walked quickly out the back door, without saying a word. The door slammed behind her. The room remained silent. My father stood there staring down at the papers. After a long moment he whispered my name, Lena. But by then I was already far from Pine Creek. And sometime around 3 in the morning my father finally understood something. The daughter he believed had abandoned the family had actually been the one holding the roof over that family for 5 years. That night after I left, my father sat alone in his office almost until sunrise, reading every document from the box. Every statement. Every receipt. Every payment. Papers he had never paid attention to before. For years, he had always left paperwork to my mother or Diana. He only signed where he was told. But that night he read everything slowly and carefully. And the more he read, the quieter he became. He saw the transfers in my name, the loans in my name, the bills I had paid, the roof repairs, the insurance payments, numbers he had never noticed before. And finally he understood something. The daughter he always believed was distant, the daughter he thought was cold, the daughter everyone had grown used to overlooking, was the one holding the roof over the entire family for years. In silence. Around 3 in the morning, my father walked into the living room. My mother was still awake, sitting on the sofa with her hands clasped tightly together. No one spoke for a moment. Then my father said quietly, "We have to go see her." My mother looked up but asked no questions. She didn't need to. They both knew where to go. I had moved to Seattle months earlier. It was the only place they could find me. My father grabbed his coat. Outside the town was still dark and silent, but they began the long drive anyway. The trip from our small town to Seattle takes about 14 hours by car. 14 hours to think. 14 hours to remember. Later, my father said that most of the drive he barely spoke, only the sound of the engine and his thoughts. He remembered evenings when I came home late from work, the times I brought food home for everyone, the times I quietly said I would take care of it, the times I stood in the kitchen washing dishes after dinner, things he once thought were ordinary. But now everything looked different. He also remembered my grandfather's birthday party, the moment I stood up in the crowded living room, the moment I placed an envelope on the table, the moment the room went silent. I had simply spoken the truth, a truth no one wanted to face. 14 hours later, that road ended in Seattle. Early that morning, the city was quiet. I sat on the porch of the small house I rented, holding a cup of coffee and watching the empty street. Seattle mornings carry a peaceful silence that feels different from anywhere else. No one called my name from inside the house. No one asked me to do anything. Only the soft wind and an occasional passing car. Then I heard a vehicle stop near the gate. At first I ignored it, until the car door opened. I looked up and saw my father stepping out. He stood there outside the gate of my house, his jacket dusty from the road, his face tired, his eyes red. For a long moment we simply stared at each other. Neither of us spoke. I did not know they had driven 14 hours to get there. I did not know my father had barely slept the night before. But I could see the exhaustion on his face. He walked a few steps closer, then stopped. Only a few meters separated us. He looked at me for a long time, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Then he spoke. 3 simple words. "I'm sorry." 3 words I had waited almost my entire life to hear. I had imagined that moment many times. I thought when I heard those words I would cry, or run forward and hug him. But when it finally happened, I simply sat there quietly. I did not run. I did not cry. I just looked at my father. I took a deep breath and spoke slowly. "I still love you and Mom." My father nodded, his eyes still red. "But I won't go back to being the invisible daughter again." The words fell softly into the quiet yard, but they were clear. My father stood silent for several seconds. Then he nodded again. No argument. No excuses. No denial. Just a nod. For the first time in my life, I realized something. He was truly listening. 3 months later, things did not return to the way they were before, and I did not want them to. But some things had changed. My father began calling me once every week. Not to ask for money, not to ask for help, just to ask, "How are you doing?" My mother began writing letters by hand. Long letters, sometimes awkward but sincere. A few months later, they visited Seattle. We ate dinner together in a small restaurant near the water. No one mentioned the past, but the silence between us felt different this time. Diana disappeared from Pine Creek not long after that. No one knew exactly where she moved. As for me, I remained in Seattle living my own life. Quiet, but lighter. And if anyone ever asks what this story taught me, I always remember one simple sentence. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes the person who speaks the least is the one carrying the most. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you did everything for your family but no one truly noticed? Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? If you have experienced something like that, share your story in the comments. I would truly like to read it and know that I was not the only person who walked this road. And if this story made you think or touched something inside you, take a moment to press like so others can see it too. If you want to hear more stories like this, stories about family truth and people who learn to stand up for themselves, subscribe to the channel. Somewhere in the next story, you may recognize a piece of your own life.